most people think if if they're struggling, they're kind of their wish is that life would be easier. And they'll say that in a number of different ways. But really what they're saying is, what I'm going through now is too difficult. And I wish it wasn't as difficult, because if my life was easier, then I'd be happier. And they believe that. And I don't think that's true at all. I think that you want to take on as much difficulty, challenge, responsibility as you can tolerate, because when you do things that are really difficult, okay, you have this sense of that your life has meaning and purpose.
Dr. Stan Beecham, I'm so excited to welcome you to this podcast because you wrote one of my favorite books, which I've lost the cover of, but completely annotated. And let me open you up with a little intro here to get people up to speed with who you are. Dr. Stan Beecham graduated from the University of Georgia with a bachelor's of psychology in 1983. He completed his doctorate in 1994 from the Georgia School of Professional Psychology. After that, he served as the sports psychologist for the University of Georgia Athletics. And starting in 2002, he founded the Leadership Resource Center, where he takes his wisdom to help the business world. He is the author of one of my favorite books, the bestselling Elite Minds: How Winners Think Differently to Create a Competitive Edge and Maximize Success. I appreciate you so much for being here.
Thank you for the invite. I hope we generate some content that helps people.
I am very sure we will, because I posted on Twitter when I was reading this book that winners expect to win. It was a passage from one of the pages where you quoted saying, if you don't expect to win, then you have disqualified yourself before the event even begins. You have handicapped yourself out of having a fair chance to win and given the field a head start and an unfair advantage. And this is like an obvious thing that I think most people know and agree with. But when most people are doing most things, do they really expect to win? Do they really expect to have the best possible podcast? Do they really expect that they're going to excel?
And we know the answer to that.
Yeah.
They don't.
So the question is, why not?
Yeah. To see it as you have a choice. See, the other way I think about the expectation to win, say in sport, that's an easy transition, is that as an athlete, if you expect to do well, if you expect to win the game, then you don't have to think about, are we going to win? Now you can really focus on the process of playing the game. And really good coaches naturally do that. They don't talk about winning. They talk about, here's what we need to do. And so when you think about the huge number of people who really suffer from anxiety is basically a thought disorder about the future. In other words, you're not anxious about last week. You're anxious about next week. And the anxious thought is, it's not going to go well. But if I thought that next week was going to go well, number one, I would have no anxiety about it. And the other thing is, I wouldn't think about what I must do. I would, what I must achieve. I would think about what am I going to do? Like, how am I going to spend Monday? And what are the things I'm going to do on Tuesday? You see what I'm saying? So when you have that expectation, it's not just the confidence of a positive expectation. It actually determines what you focus on, what your mind thinks about. And when you expect to do well, you don't have a lot of concern for yourself. The concern is about the task.
So we live in a world that is a society that is anxious. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people listening to this are worried about some future scenario. And you could say that's a result of consumerism. You could say that's a result of marketing. You could say that's a result of social media. Whatever the result is, or the reason why the world is more anxious than ever is potentially irrelevant. What can we do about it in the present moment?
Well, to understand, and people get mad at me when I say this, but to understand that the cause of your anxiety, for the most part, is not the external world. The cause of your anxiety is you and how your mind, right, I mean, there are neurochemical, neurophysiological causes for anxiety, but I think for most people, it's primarily a thought disorder. Okay? And if you view it as such, then I ask you the question, well, who controls your mind? Who controls your thoughts? And you say, well, I do. And I go, well, how good of a job are you doing then? And if I'm an anxious person, the answer is not very good. Okay? And no one's immune from this. Okay? I was up at 4:00 this morning because I didn't sleep well last night, because of something that happened in the previous day that I hadn't resolved in my mind. Okay? But even when I'm dealing with my own, anxious thoughts or uncertainties, I'm also able to, at the same time, realize what's going on. In other words, what I'm doing or not doing. Versus a lot of people who are really anxious, if you listen to them closely, what they're telling you is they're waiting for the world to change or for some other person to change their behavior, right? Like, Danny, as soon as you quit treating me this way, then I could be happy again, right? Or as soon as my boss does this, or if my company would just acknowledge what a tremendous contribution I make, if my partner would just really appreciate me as much as they should, then these problems, supposedly all go away. So the other part of the anxiety is we're looking externally for the answer. And it's not. On rare occasion, sometimes there is, but it's internally.
So what's causing you to go back and forth in your mind at 4 a.m.?
Well, number one is that our what's interesting about the human mind is we can do past, present, and future. Your dog's doing present. Okay? Your dog is not failed to sleep last night because of something that happened, yesterday. The same with, small children, right? Therefore, if your popsicle falls out of your hand and lands on the ground, it's the end of the damn world, right? And you're losing your mind because that popsicle now being dirty and you can't eat it again is the worst thing that could possibly happen to you in your whole life. That's a person being in the moment.
So what was happening to you at 4 a.m.? It was just you going back and forth on past or future?
My mind wasn't at rest. And so I was up, and I knew how to get my mind back where I needed to be, right? And it's not laying in bed, right? It's getting up and taking some action to it. And, I was able to do that. So the other thing with anxiety is don't fight with it. It doesn't negotiate with you very well. I was recently diagnosed with leukemia in July. And what I realized, and I immediately spent 25 days in the hospital when they began my treatment, my chemotherapy. And one of the things I realized is that leukemia doesn't negotiate. Okay. You see what I'm saying? It's just going to do what it does, which is try to create, cancer tries to create as much more cancer as it possibly can. That's what it does. Don't take it personally, It's not like, your cancer's being meaner to you than the other guy's cancer. And so it's not going to negotiate with me. So then I have to negotiate with me, right? I have to say, okay, you got cancer. And you're going to be in the hospital for 25 days, and you can't leave the unit, right? Because you have no immune system. Okay. So what are you going to do with these 25 days, Stan? Right? Because if you leave, you're probably going to die, right? Because a third of the people who have the cancer I have die in the first 30 days, primarily because they don't know they have it. And so you have no platelets, so you bleed out, or you have no immune system, so you get, a common cold and, end up, right, with a respiratory disease that, like pneumonia that you die from. So you're in this tremendously vulnerable place. But everybody's in a tremendously vulnerable place. I was just aware of it, right? Like, you don't have a guarantee, and I don't, let's assume you're healthy and I got leukemia. There's no guarantee that you're going to outlive me. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so so that's the other thing with the anxiety thing is, if there is no guarantee, Okay. If there is no knowing the future, and we know that the future is uncertain, how do we deal with this? Why don't more of us, take our lives? I mean, that's one way to think about suicide, right? It's a terrible thing, and it is. But if you really dig into it and you see the suffering that people have, a lot of, psychologists and psychiatrists will tell you they're surprised that more people don't kill themselves based on the degree to which they're suffering. And we don't talk about that.
Have you ever considered committing suicide?
No, but I have had the thought that if I was dead, that it would be better, that I didn't see being dead as a terrible thing. Like I saw it as a resolution to a problem, but I've never been in a place where I thought taking my own life was the solution. And I think a lot of people, there's a difference between wanting to kill yourself and thinking, if I were to, die in a car accident today, that wouldn't be a terrible thing. So not wanting to kill yourself, but also not having a strong motivation to be alive. And I can tell you right now, Danny, there's a lot of those people. Like, their passion and zest for life is, almost flatlined. They're dragging themselves through it day after day after day.
You said before in a previous podcast something that really hit me, which is the primary reason to get your shit together is because you can help other people do that. But if you can't get your shit together, you're going to create a lot of suffering and pain for other people.
Yep.
And that was something that I really never considered before, that you not getting your own life in order is actually creating pain for other human beings.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people who are currently suffering are thinking about their life that way.
Yeah. They don't think that they're creating suffering for others. Yeah. Now it's true. I mean, another way of thinking about this is, let's say like you really do some work on yourself, maybe you get into therapy or maybe you get involved in some activity that makes you feel better and you get your life together. That's not a selfish act. That's a social act. Okay. And if you see it that way, then there's extra impetus for you to do so. Because there's a lot of us that we feel like if I went and spent, a couple of $1,000s on myself to help me get my shit together, that, that's say a couple $1,000s that I don't spend on my children or, somebody else. Right. And what I say is, no, that's not a selfish act. Wanting to live fully and completely is a huge contribution to everyone in your circle and everyone who cares about you.
Okay, so take me through this, right? You're somebody, it seems like, based on your resume and what you've listed before and who you are, it seems like you've lived above baseline, let's call it. You've had your shit together. This is an assumption based on what you've written and how you've helped people. And then through, let's call it, unforeseen circumstances that you couldn't have possibly predicted, you are now below baseline and you're in the negative, right? You don't have your shit together when you're in the hospital bed and you're like, all right, 25 days I have to stay here. And that is suffering that you could argue you didn't create, right? And what is your mindset and how do you use, what are the first few things you think about and how do you get yourself through that scenario?
You mean to talk specifically about my leukemia diagnosis?
Yeah.
Okay. So when they first came and told me, when the doctor first came to my room and said, you have leukemia, they told me there's a lot of different types of leukemia. Okay. And they told me I had AML, and which is a type of leukemia. And the type that I actually have is APL, which is a subset of AML. Okay, both of them are acute leukemias. There's chronic and acute. And anyway, So when the doctor comes in and says AML when she leaves, of course, what I do is I pull my phone out and I Google, right, AML. And it basically says I might get these numbers off a little bit, but basically I got a 30% chance of living 5 more years, which means I have a 70% chance of not. So I was digesting that, and a couple people have asked me, like, how did you respond to that? And I said, like when your team is winning a game, right? And let's say, you're winning by, 14 or 21 points in the third quarter and you're still halfway through the fourth quarter. We still got this because you're still up by 10. And then on the last play of the game, you lose the game and you're like, fuck, I didn't think it was going to end like that. Like, that's how I felt. I remember thinking, I really didn't think that leukemia is what was going to take me down, but son of a bitch, it looks like it just might, right? Like, chances are 70% chance, Stan, in 5 years, you're not here anymore. And I just remember thinking, like, shit, like, it wasn't so much sadness. It was kind of a frustration, right? Like, I didn't see this one coming, right? This was talking about getting blindsided. And it really, the sad part was then when I realized I have to tell my family, right? And of course, when you deliver that kind of news, you're ruining people's day, right? I mean, if somebody, tells you they have, they're sick or have a disease or have cancer, and it doesn't look, very likely that, that they're going to get this thing behind them, you suffer with them if you have any empathy. So that was the part that, made me weep, is that I got to tell other people, and it's really going to, cause them a lot of pain. But the thought of dying doesn't trouble me. I'm not going to lay in a bed, right, and rot away. That's, to me, makes no sense. But I also worry that you may not have that choice, right?
How do you prepare for that conversation?
Oh, when you're telling people?
Yeah.
Well, 3 hours later, I found out, and I hadn't told anybody yet. I was still kind of sitting with it. I found out that I had APL, which the odds are much better. In fact, it's kind of the best of all the leukemias. So I went from having a 70% chance of being dead in 5 years to a 90% chance of not.
Wow.
Yeah. So in a couple of hours, the odds got significantly better. Now, I really think that I'm going to be fine and I'm going to beat this thing, right? But I'm also aware that 10% is not nothing, okay? But none of us have a guarantee. That's the other thing, right?
Yeah. You've said before, everyone has fear. Everyone has anxiety. But the question is, do you have courage? In other words, how do you respond to the fear? And I can only imagine that the fear you would have in that moment when someone tells you you have a 70% chance of dying in the next 5 years is at a heightened state. And yeah, that's something that I think a lot of people are going to go through and going to think about themselves. Maybe not that specific situation, but that feeling of like, oh, I could die. Oh, I'm scared. Oh, what am I going to do? And then the question becomes like, what is the response to that?
Yeah. I think the thing that's important to note is that just because you're fearful or anxious, that doesn't have to stop you. You can be afraid and do the thing that you're afraid of doing. Like, you can be afraid to fly and you can still get on the damn plane and take the flight, okay? And be a mess the whole time. Now, the question is that a good strategy? And probably most people, most of the time, yes, it would be. I mean, we know that that's one of the ways of overcoming your fears is to not avoid them. And when you look at psychotherapy, I mean, if you think about, what is psychotherapy, the way I think about it is everybody has their shit, their problems, right? Okay. Now, you may or may not know what your stuff is. And so if you don't know what it is, then it's like you could have a mental disorder, if you will, and not really know it, so you wouldn't take any action. But let's say you have something like depression, okay? And you have depression. And you decided that, hey, I'm going to go see somebody and talk about this, right? What essentially you're going to do in therapy is talk about the depression and what got you depressed and why you're depressed. In other words, when you have the problem, you can walk away from the problem or you can walk straight into the problem. Okay. And so what a lot of people do is they avoid the problem thinking that it'll go away. And of course it doesn't, right? The only way to make it go away is you have to walk straight into the storm. And then when you get in the eye of the storm, you have to stay there for a while and you're getting, pummeled by the wind and the rain and, the flying debris. It doesn't kill you, but it sure as hell feels like it's going to kill you, right? But having the courage to face that thing and tell yourself the truth about that thing, that's the way out.
Why don't we do that?
Well, for the obvious reasons. It ain't a hell of a lot of fun, right? I mean, if you had a miserable childhood and you realize that as an adult, it still, haunts you every night, and let's say you were abused emotionally, physically, or sexually, and that's part of it. If you don't address that and dig into it and get an understanding of how it's playing out in your life now, there's no path forward for you. You just keep living the same day over and over and over again, right? I mean, that's what depression is, in my opinion. It's being stuck, right? So you don't sense that your life is moving forward. And a lot of times it's being either isolated or disconnected from other people.
So this is great because you're separating people out into two different categories. One is that they either have awareness of their circumstances or they don't.
Right.
If they don't have awareness of the circumstances, you can't possibly get better. But if you do have awareness, then we can actually do something about it.
Yeah.
So the role of the psychologist is to help someone become aware of the things that are holding them back and then help them move forward through those scenarios.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
And the way you become aware of it is you talk about it in as specific a terms as you can, right? Not in general terms, but you go very specifically.
And what separates or what is the difference between a psychologist who is good versus a psychologist who is great from your vantage point?
The psychologist is good. They've done their own work. They know where the bones are buried in their, own closet. They know their own shit. They can see their own scar tissue. And they're not ashamed of it. Yeah.
So because otherwise then you would project your own stuff onto the person that you're speaking to.
Well, I don't think you can take someone somewhere that you haven't gone before. I mean, you think about, what a good coach, a good leader, a good therapist, a good parent, a good teacher, what are these people doing? They're taking you to a place on the map that you haven't gone to, and they know how to get there. And more importantly, they know how to get back. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of high performers, entrepreneurs, people changing the world listen to this podcast. And you said before, those types of people, they're lonelier than ever. And they're lonely in general and I really never considered that either because I'm like, oh yeah, you being in the top 1% of your field forces you to be different than other people. But that difference can help cause you to feel disconnected. So what can high performers do to not feel lonely?
Well, find your tribe. I mean, hang out with other people that are in a similar scenario to you. I mean, if you're the CEO of a company, don't expect the people at the director level of your company to understand what's going on with you, right? I mean, it's lonely at the top because there's fewer people there. And so part of it is to have some, mechanism to dig into that. I mean, I do a lot of executive coaching, some of which are CEOs, and they'll say that they feel kind of actually on the outside of the company, right? And they know that when people come to them, they don't really tell them the truth. They kind of tell them what they think they want to hear. So a lot of senior executives will say it's really hard to get people to tell me the truth, right? But they do feel that sense of being separate than. The other thing that's happening now with kind of what you might call the political correctness that's going on, or the wokeness, is what we can say and what we can't say and how we can say it is being very closely judged. And so, I make a comment and my comment makes you uncomfortable. And because you're uncomfortable, I therefore did something wrong, right? When in fact you are already uncomfortable, right? I just reminded you of the thing that you're already injured by. And so the other things that, senior leaders are telling me is they feel like they have to be very careful of what they say, that, they know that someone is just waiting for them to make a comment so that they can capture that and then, go tell on you that, so-and-so said this, as if there's anybody who hasn't said something in their life that they wish they would have said differently, right? So you got that. So now there's a great risk of speaking openly and candidly, because it's just like this podcast. There'll be certainly someone who will be offended by something that you or I say, probably me, but, and they'll say, I can't believe you had that guy on your podcast. He's an insensitive jerk or whatever it is, right? I mean, of course that's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because you've said before, you're not your thoughts and you're not your emotions. And I also extend that to, I'm not the things I say, right? And understanding that I'm not the things I say and you're not the things you say gives you freedom to understand, I could say something, it could be wrong, and I could correct that, right?
Yeah. Or what if you change your mind about something,
Correct.
What if you had a belief last year that you don't have anymore? It could be political, religious. It could be a belief about yourself and your own, what's important to you. But we live in a culture that if you change your mind, there'll be people who say, well, you're this wishy-washy person because you change your mind. It's like, isn't that the essence of growth?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that what growth is that you change your mind and you change your behavior, right? But we should all be looking for the thing about ourselves that we want to get rid of, the belief that you want to get rid of or the behavior that you want to get rid of. We should do that more so than the thing that you want to add on to you. And see, most people feel like the path out is forward. Sometimes the path out is backwards. Sometimes the thing that's really holding you back is not something that you need to start doing, but something you need to stop doing.
Could you describe an example of you helping one of your athletes or business executive with that situation of removing something from their life that when they did, it actually helped them gain a tremendous amount?
Usually it's a thought. Usually it's a belief that's inaccurate and limiting. And so I believe in this concept of eras in thinking. And so I would say to a person, I understand that you believe that, but I don't think it's true. I think it's an era in thinking, and here's why. And of course, part of what you're trying to do is encourage them to think about that. What if I'm holding something that's true that it wasn't? But I mean, all you got to do is open a history book, right? I mean, there was a point in time where the Earth was the center of the universe, and the Earth was flat. Okay, and you could fall off it, and that was scientific fact, and that was what everybody believes. Okay, and you can see as we move through time, and we have more, the science evolves, so we have more data, we have better evidence. Those things change people's belief system, and I continue to be amazed by the beliefs that people have that aren't serving them at all. Okay, and in my mind are inaccurate, but they're hanging on to them with both hands. Right? And what I say was, well, what would happen if you just let that go? Well, there'd be a vacuum, right? And you're going to fill the vacuum with something because, humans abhor a vacuum, right? The mind abhors a vacuum. We have to put something in there. And, but for me, oftentimes that's the starting point. What's the belief that you have right now that is the most limiting thing, that if you were to give yourself permission to change your mind, that, things would begin to get different. Because if you think that you can't do something, you're right? Because we know that human beings just don't generally attempt to do things that they don't think they can do. So the first step is thinking you can do it. I mean, this is why I think you like Deion Sanders, is getting so much attention, is, he has this audacity, and if you look at the pregame reel that I saw, this whole thing, he would say, I believe, and then the kids would say, I believe back. And he went back and forth, I believe, I believe. Now, the subtext is, what is it they believe? And my sense is what they believe is that they're good enough to compete with anyone, and that they can, if they play their best football, they'll win. My sense is that's the belief, right? And probably this time last year, that belief was not present in that locker room. Of course, there's a lot of mostly new people, and a few of the kids, are still around. But that's really what you're trying to do, is you're trying to change belief system. Because when you change belief system, then you change behavior.
Coach Deion Sanders has come up for the second podcast in a row now. And I want to insert, Video King Pablo will insert Deion Sanders' pregame speech right here on YouTube.
Right.
But
is it the I believe thing?
Usually God gave me a word long before this, but he's been holding it. Because it's not about them. This is about us. This has nothing to do with the team that's opposing us. This is about us. This ain't got nothing to do with the naysayers, the unbelievers, the haters, the doubters. This is about us. When we started this journey, we told you it was going to be trying, it was going to be tough, but you endured because it's about us. That man next to you is a miracle. That man next to you is a believer. That man next to you is a go-getter. That man next to you is a dog. That man next to you is somebody who wants this thing. That man next to you is somebody who believes. That man next to you is somebody that got to have it today. We ain't got tomorrow. We got now. We ain't got next. We got now. We ain't coming no more. Since y'all know we here, give me my theme music.
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable how often people go into competitions without that mindset. And, one thing that I'm thinking more and more about, and that your book has helped illuminate for me, is this concept of you creating in your mind injuries happening before they do. I was just talking to a friend. I had coffee with him. He said, yeah, like I'm dealing with this hip issue and I can't work on it. I don't know what to do. And I said, what happened before? What were the 3 months prior? He's like, oh, I was stressed with work. I was stressed with all these new responsibilities. I was like, oh, I understand why you got injured, because you created that injury as a way to help yourself not have to work out and do all those things. And his face looked at me like I had just told him something that was so unbelievable and so correct that he couldn't imagine it to be true. And it's like, that's what your book did for me. It helped me give me a new model for injuries. So could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think, I would put injury and illness together in this statement that, like when an athlete gets injured, one of the questions I ask them is, what's the benefit of the injury? And they usually give me this look like, what do you mean the benefit of the injury? And I was like, well, what are you doing now? Well, I'm resting. Okay. Like that's what injury makes you do, right? Is you have to rest that part that's injured, or maybe your whole self. What does illness do? You get the flu. What happens? Well, you lay down, right? You go to bed, you rest. And then that's how you get better. If you don't go to bed and rest, you might actually get worse. So you see what I'm saying? So maybe part of what injury and illness is telling us is you need to rest more. You've exceeded your physical, psychological limit here. So we're going to put you in timeout, okay? And we're going to, since you don't have the sense to do it for yourself, okay, we're going to sit you down, or we're going to make you lay down for a while, and then we'll tell you when you can get back up, which is when you're well again. And that's exactly what happens.
So your mind must have thought and gone to this when the leukemia diagnosis happened.
Oh, yeah.
How were you complicit in creating the suffering that
you endured? I'm glad you brought up, because I've actually thought that. But so APL, acute promyelocytic leukemia, is caused by a genetic mutation. So, you got 23 pairs of chromosomes, right, in the cell. And on the chromosomes are genes. So I had a gene mutation where a gene from the 15th chromosome and a gene from the 17th chromosome, they elongated and kind of connected, right? So if you think about like the rungs of a ladder, there's supposed to be space. Well, they touched. And just that mutation, and you're not born with it, okay? And we don't know what causes it. But that mutation causes APL, okay? And, I mean, we have we know people who've had previous cancers and radiations and treatments. It increases the chances of it get it. We know most people get it around age 40. I got it at age 61. But we don't know what causes it. But to your point, you damn right I've sat around and thought, okay, is there something about my lifestyle or what I'm doing, that gave me cancer? And I don't know. And the people studying this don't know. But it's not out of the realm of me considering that. Like, what was my role in this? So when you have a genetic mutation like this, it's equivalent to being struck by lightning. Okay. So I have a disease that somewhere between 2 and 4 people in a million get it. Okay. Wow. So it's pretty rare. And I was explaining to someone about this type of cancer, and I said, it's like getting struck by lightning. It's like, why did someone get struck by lightning? It's because they were standing where the lightning hit. That's why. I mean, so then I looked up. So what do you think the chances of you getting struck by lightning are in your lifetime? It's 18,800. A lot of people think getting struck by lightning is a 1 in a million kind of thing. It's actually a 1 in 1.5 million in a given year. So in 2023, you have a 1 in 1.5 million chances of getting struck by lightning. But in your lifetime, it's 18,800. So the fact of the matter is, you got a better chance of getting struck by lightning than I do of getting this leukemia. Right? And so, which leads me to, not everything has an explanation. I mean, there is some mystery still left out there, despite what we've done with science. And this is where, religious people will say, yes, we embrace the mystery. I mean, most religions have this mystical, mysterious of things that happen that are miraculous in nature and shouldn't happen. And the question is, do you accept that, But there is a mystery to it all. And I think for me, part of it is seeing the beauty of that. Because here's the deal. If you knew exactly how your life was going to play out, okay, what would that be a better life than the one that you have? Like if you can know everything before it happened for the rest of your life, or you could get the whole picture right now, like, would you want it? See? I mean, people don't, you really need to think about that. I mean, I would argue that life might get pretty boring, or the adventure. I mean, it's just why, you want to watch the ball game live, because the fact of the matter, at the beginning of the game, you don't know who's going to win. And that's the whole drama, is who's going to win. Right. I mean, I would tell when I was working at University of Georgia, I was working with college kids, and most of the teams at Georgia were really good. Right. And then I was talking to a guy on the men's tennis team, and they're they won national championships, but they're kind of a top 5, top 10 team year in, year out. Really good program. So I'm talking to this kid, and he's kind of frustrated because he's not playing much, right? In tennis, you have 6 people who play singles, and then you have, 3 doubles. But most of the good singles players are also on the double. But you'll have, out of a 10 or 12 guys, you might have a couple of guys who don't play. So anyways, this kid was a freshman, and he was being redshirted, and he wasn't playing, and he was really upset with me. And because he wasn't playing. And I said, well, tell me why you came to Georgia. Why did you pick Georgia? And he said, well, it's a good program. So I said, so you picked it because you knew there were going to be other good tennis players here, and you picked it because you knew that you're going to go against the best competition, right? So in other words, you picked a difficult path. You chose this. And now you're in the middle of this difficult path, and you're saying, this really sucks. This is really hard. And I said, yeah, but you still made a good decision. And I said, let's flip it around. Let's say, and I said, tell me the name of a school that was kind of a lower tier school that you could have gone to and clearly been, if not the best guy on the team, one of them. And so he gave me a name, I said. And I said, well, but why didn't you go there? You knew you were going to play, and you knew you were going to be the man. And I said, because you need the challenge, right? And you want to be good at tennis, but the only way that you're going to be good and grow as an athlete is that you're around other people who, if you put your guard down, they're going to kick your ass, right? See, what I'm getting to is most people think if if they're struggling, they're kind of their wish is that life would be easier. And they'll say that in a number of different ways. But really what they're saying is what I'm going through now is too difficult. And I wish it wasn't as difficult, because if my life was easier, then I'd be happier. And they believe that. And I don't think that's true at all. I think that you want to take on as much difficulty, challenge, responsibility as you can tolerate, because when you do things that are really difficult, okay, you have this sense of that your life has meaning and purpose. In other words, what gives life meaning and purpose is not the result that you get, the reward. It really is the journey. It's the process. Okay. And then if you have a life that's full of meaning and purpose, then you come to the conclusion to have a good life. The way I litmus test this with people when I speak is I'll say to the group, I want you to think of the thing that you've done in your life thus far that you're most proud of. Okay. Not, your wife having a baby, but something that you did personally. Okay. Maybe a degree that you earned, maybe a triathlon that you ran, or a mountain that you climbed, or a, person that you saved from drowning, or whatever it is. But think of the thing that you have done thus far in your life that you're the most proud of. And I say, wait for everybody to get it. I said, okay, when you get it, raise your hand. So everybody's raising. And I said, okay, so you got the thing that you're most proud of. I said, now, next question is, the thing that you did, was it difficult or easy? And for those of you who say difficult, was it a little bit difficult, or was it really difficult? And then I say to the group, stand up if the thing that you're most proud of is also the most difficult thing that you've done thus far in your life. And most everyone in the room stands up every time. Okay, so that's the proof, right? Like if you want to have a life that you're proud of and do things that you're proud of, then you gotta freaking do hard shit. And not complain when you pick difficult, then not complain when you got difficult. But I really do think a lot of people in their suffering, what they're saying to themselves is, if life wasn't so difficult and so hard, I would be happier. And I see, with parents where we protect our children, we do things for our children that they can do for them. We kind of fight their fights for them. We intervene on their behalf. And that's not helping the child.
You've said before that the worst advice you can give someone who is trying to be successful is to be careful.
Yeah.
It decreases creativity and risk-taking, and it deters performance. And I would like to apologize to my parents in advance who, anytime I would leave the house, said, be careful. And I know they meant great intentions by it. But when you said that in the book, it really struck me. It's like, how much has being careful, being drilled into my head, deterred my own performance in life?
To be risk averse, right? Don't take risk. Avoid risk. And if you think about the people that we study in history books, you know, that we're supposed to emulate, that are supposed to be our heroes, these were risk takers, and frequently put their own life at great risk, right? And now the flip side of that is to not be stupid, right? To not take unnecessary risk.
How do you know?
Well, I think that's where you want to have some people around you who can give you kind of a, you know, you can bounce some ideas like, you know, do you think it'd be stupid if I, you know, jumped out of the airplane without the parachute? And they go, yeah, if you're going to jump out the airplane, you probably want the parachute, and you probably want the backup one on the front too, right? And if you really want to be careful, you know, have some guy who's jumped a bunch to jump alongside of you and hang on you until your parachute opens, then turn loose. That's probably, you know, it's like, okay, so there's a lot of ways of jumping out of an airplane. Some of them have irrational risk and others don't. And what I'm saying is, if you're trying to avoid all risk, which you can't do, by the way, I don't think, you're probably going to really fail to do the things that you're capable of doing. Right? You're not going to challenge yourself. And it's, and again, then you got a situation where you basically your fear is dictating your life choices versus love dictating your life choices. If you're doing something that you really love and there's some risk involved, you know, you probably do it anyway.
I asked my dad for advice a while back, and he basically said two things: work hard and be kind. And you've said before, if you're loving and diligent, you can do whatever you like. So that seems to be a common theme. When did that hit you? If you are loving and diligent, you can do whatever you like.
Yeah, that was a quote from The Road Less Traveled, a book that Scott Peck wrote in 1979, which was a bestseller for many, many years. And it's a diligeat quovis fac. It's a Latin quote. I'm trying to think who said it. I think it might be St. Augustine. But anyway, you know, some famous dead person, you know, said that. But I think about it of, you know, being loving, which means really caring about other people, and then diligent as in willing to take on difficulty and challenge, right? Like if you're trying to simplify life, like those are two things to pursue every day. You know, the way I think about, for me, loving, I think about it differently. I think about, I can be more kind. I can be more empathic to other people's struggle and difficulty. And I know that sometimes I'm not. I think when I was not sitting in the hospital, I did a lot of sitting, but I did a lot of walking around. I was in there, like I said, you know, I couldn't leave the unit for 25 days, and I was on a unit. It had 55 beds, so at any given time, there's about 45 patients on the unit, okay? And so it's a long rectangle, and I could walk. And I did like 3 miles a day, you know, pushing my IV pole up and down the hall. And the people who couldn't get out of bed, most of them would open up the blinds on their door so you could see them in the bed. And I'd, you know, wave at them. And I would say at any given time of the, say, 45 of us, there's 5, 6, or 7 who are able to walk around. And the rest of them are bedridden. And, you know, I would make eye contact with these people through the look at them. I wanted them to know that I saw them. And part of it is, it made me realize how fortunate that I was. You know, it's like I can get up and walk. You know, I'm wearing my own clothes. I can eat food. They had these big, you know, IV bags. You know, you hooked up to an IV, and I still got one. I don't know if you can see it. Can you see that bump there?
Yep.
That's a port it's a plastic thing that sits beneath my skin where they, you know, when you go get the chemo. And so everybody's got something like this going on, and you got all these bags dripping into you. And when you get really sick and you can't eat, there's this, big, like 2-liter IV bag. They call it the banana bag because it's yellow color, but basically you're getting all your nutrients through your IV because you're not eating enough to stay alive. Okay. Wow. So you see people on the banana bag, but being up and moving around, I realized that, I'm doing pretty good. And it really helped me keep my head clear. It was kind of like, winning a, you're the tallest short guy kind of thing, but
perspective.
Yeah, but it's perspective, but it's this whole sense of like, in some of these people, I mean, it's pretty clear, like this person's dying, right? Like they're not getting better. And I actually talked to a guy who was in the hospital with me. He left and came back, and I was talking to him, and he was walking around, and I go, well, you're coming back? And he said, well, I'm going to get a T-cell transplant. And he said, because the doctor said if I do that, I can live 3 more months.
Wow.
And I said, well, what are you going to do? He said, well, I want to go to the beach one more time and sit on the back porch with my dogs. That's the thing about it is you think these people that have a couple of months, like they want to go to Disney World, and no, they don't. They just want to chill and just take it all in. I mean, there's a lesson in that, right? That some of the best, sweetest stuff is really just basic, like being around people that you love, and trying to help the people that you love, and maybe even help people that are strangers to you. Like that's, when people have a little bit of time, that's kind of what they want to do. You get really clear about, what's important. You don't need to be entertained. You don't need to be wild or dazzled. Like this guy says, I want to sit on my back porch with my dogs.
It's absolutely incredible how we look at a human being who is in its first 3 months and we awe at it. And we look at it with so much joy and enthusiasm and excitement. But that guy who wants to just sit on the back porch one more time, that is that baby in its first 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
It's just some time has gone by, but we don't have that same reaction. We don't have that same reaction, but we understand like there's so much power in being human. I think is the thing that is connecting both of them for me. We understand at the beginning and at the end, wow, this is magical. This whole ride that we're on, that we get to experience and appreciate with one another.
Yeah.
And in the middle is where we often forget it.
Yeah. I think the other thing is if you're fortunate enough to get a glimpse of what it is that you're really passionate about, what's really important, if you don't pursue that, you will pay a huge price, and it will be your own, misery and suffering. And because here's the deal. I mean, you can fail doing something that you love, and you can fail doing something you don't love, right? So given that, I mean, you can die doing something you love, and you can die doing something you hate. So, and you don't want to live with a regret, right? And so when you look at the research of, people in retirement homes and, what are the regrets, one of the top ones is always, I didn't really do what I wanted to do. I did what other people told me I should do, right? I didn't have my own, conviction of my own will. I did what I was told I was supposed to do. Then it's terrible. I mean, that's one thing I can say is I've pretty much, my adult life and my career, I've done stuff that I wanted to do that I was really passionate about. And I know that a lot of people, weren't able to create that for themselves. But I think if you live your life that way, you don't run the risk of having a lot of regret. You still are going to be challenged, okay, and you're still going to get your ass beat, and there's going to still be pain and suffering. But when you choose it, right, because you're pursuing something you want to, it's different than if you feel like it's being placed upon you.
Very well said. I like to end these podcasts by asking the guest for a challenge so that someone listening or watching can actually do something that we've spoke about to change their life in some way?
Yeah.
What's a challenge you have for someone listening?
So my challenge would be is to get paper and pen out and begin to collect, in writing the essentially your beliefs, the things that you hold as true, okay, about yourself, other people, the world, and begin to make a list. And if you really do this diligently, there will be a long list, okay, of things, primarily the things that you think about yourself and the things that you think about the world, right? And then after you do that and try to create as an exhaustive list, I mean, at the very least 100, okay? And after you have a pretty, exhaustive list, kind of take a little space from it, take a little break to it, and then come back to it as if you're someone else, okay? And then start drawing lines through the things that you think, this probably isn't true, right? Like this guy, and how you know something true is there's evidence for it. And I've done this with some pretty major beliefs, in my own life, things that most of my adult life I held as true. And then I realized that, I believe it primarily because somebody told me.
What's a big one?
God stuff, religion stuff. Most people, we inherit the religion of our family. Other beliefs about people. I grew up in the South in the 60s, right when they segregated schools. And, black and white people were still, the society, the culture was still very separate. And people, not just white people, but, white, black, and everything in between, we had some pretty strong opinions about the other, right? And in large part because we haven't really lived together. And so you've got, you got people who have prejudiced beliefs, but they don't even know they're prejudiced because everybody else has that same belief, right?
Right. It's hard to see the label inside.
Yes. The jar. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. 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 A pickle jar can't read its own label.
Yeah. So, I mean, you look at that and you're like, all right, I don't believe this anymore. Was there some time between you coming to those beliefs?
Then it was a lot of studying. It was a lot of reading. I realized it's kind of like, it's like kind of reading the marketing material from a company versus, the independent research on the product.
Yeah.
And what I realized is I just read the marketing material and I wanted to read the people who weren't trying to sell me something, the people who really tried to, figure out what's going on there. Because I don't think, with religion and spirituality, I don't think throwing everything out is the path. And I don't think buying all of it is, there's a place in between where there's, in these mythological teachings, there's truths in them, right? And that's basically what, most holy books are these verbal, oral stories that were told over and over and over again, right? Till somebody wrote it down in their own version. But there's important messages to be learned by that, right? And you should use it to guide you. For example, Malcolm X was an eye for an eye guy. Malcolm X said by any means necessary. Martin Luther King Jr. was a turn the other cheek kind of guy. We got to see at the same time both of those philosophies play out, right?
Yeah. I
mean, really pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And then, okay, so what do you think? I mean, you got to see apartheid in South America. You got to see these things, and they're playing out now. I mean, with Russia and Ukraine, and there's all these, big social experiments that are going on in big stages. Like, pay attention, people. Like, you can learn something about yourself and other people if you pay attention, but your own bias will get in the way of you seeing it as it is. Like, you got to get the scales off of your eyes so that you can see what's really going on.
Stan.
And much of this is people trying to get you to buy their belief system.
Yeah. Dr. Beecham, I'm so grateful for you. I could speak to you all day. I know you have a hard out at the top of the hour.
Yeah, I do. I got to go to chemo.
Oh, man.
But we can do this again if you want to.
I would love that so much. Everyone check out Elite Minds by Dr. Stan Beecham, one of my favorite books I've read in a long, long time, and one I'll be rereading over and over again. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks, Danny.
And be well.
All right, sir. You too. Bye-bye.